Right. Well, thanks for showing up as always. Good to see my friends from the fifth floor. Um, so every spring and winter breakout, some component of the associate deans give some kind of talk about intellectual integrity on campus. And I usually talk about the numbers, and there's some amount of bemoaning the fact that people don't report in certain parts of campus. And I'm not going to do that this time. I will tell you that the numbers are essentially unchanged, and there are still parts of campus that basically never report any violations of the campus academic integrity policy, and that's a big problem. I am sure that some of you are here to talk about or to find answers about the problème du jour, which is the prevalence of artificial intelligence routines writing papers for students. I'm happy to talk about that. I will give a plug to John, who is giving a presentation on, is it Friday, John?
Yes.
That I'm sure will be much more informational when it comes to that. I have lots of opinions about that. I don't think that it is the end of the world. I think that it requires instructors to be creative, and that means that instructors are going to have to put more work into things that they've been happily not having to put that much work into for a number of years. And that sucks, but you know, it's the way of things. It is the ever-present arms race of integrity, where one side does something and the other side has to do something else, and it continues to go along. And that's just the way it is. But I instead wanted to give you a case study. And if I can find the document that I had created, there it is. So this is a case study based on a situation from this past fall. So I learned about this message in January, and I learned about it in the process of going through a disqualification appeal. And the message that I'm showing you is something that an instructor posted in Starfish about a student that was failing a class. Please speak to an advisor and drop the class. Again, the second submission you made for assignment X, and I just made up the class, it's not CAS 100, which doesn't exist, is clearly not your writing. It appears to be from a college paper mill or an article from blah, blah, blah. It was the second submission you made after the first submission was also noted as a plagiarized paper. That did not even vaguely fit the assignment description. As you said, or as I said to you the first time you submitted a plagiarized paper, it's easy to identify writing that doesn't belong to an individual, blah, 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 blah. Important part here is the first line of the third paragraph on the screen. I will not report you for plagiarism, as I know that can derail a student's career. Think about that for a moment. The instructor, will not report you for plagiarism, as I know how that can derail a student's career. But as this is your second chance to correct a previously plagiarized paper, exclamation point, I do not have any other options and no solutions to dilemmas you will face as a result of dropping this class. And the message goes on with a bunch of things about how the instructor is very caring and is only in this for the good of the student. This was in a 100 level class. This was for a freshman. There was never a report of this violation. The only reason that I learned about this was because I happened to be looking at the student's starfish record to try to figure out what their standing was academically. I'm glad that the instructor did write something about this somewhere to someone. So I was able to go back to the instructor and say, look, I read this in Starfish. It is the obligation of instructors who see violations of the policy, whether it be cheating, fabrication, copyright violation, or plagiarism, to report it. It is an obligation. It is an obligation because if we do not know that the student has done this, we then don't have any opportunity later on, if this student is a serial plagiarizer, a serial cheat, or otherwise someone who is eroding the integrity fabric of the institution, we don't have the same resource to do something about this. If the student continues to get passed over or continues to escape undetected, then that's not good for anyone. I implored the instructor to report this. I emphasized to the instructor that this has no chance of derailing the student's career. The student is a first-year student. There's no way that a first report of plagiarism or even a second report of plagiarism is going to do anything, perhaps other than occasioning a conversation. We report these things so that we can make sure that as students progress along, that there aren't things that are happening consistently, that are happening repeatedly. So with that as sort of the framing of things, I just wanted to get your opinion about this and perhaps your advice on what more can be done to try to encourage people to report and not just bury their head in the sand. Because from my standpoint, this was an instructor who made the choice. I have found this. I know what the process is. I am either too focused on something related to the student's career that I'm fearing reporting this, or I am just too damned lazy to report this. And it's very difficult for me to not go in that second direction.
I got the address.
So Liz,
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, you have this case study and everyone secretly in their mind is playing the game of who actually wrote this.
you'll never know.
There's a list in my head, right? I don't know. Kind of toolish, the whole kind of note, but the reporting is, I don't know, it's, and I don't know that, well, I think we'd be surprised if you did the version of the equivalence of a syllabus quiz to the faculty here at this institution about our policies for academic dishonesties. Most of them would fail. Most of them do not know what to do. They haven't paid attention to what to do, and they don't even know. I even had, I had a conversation on the 4th floor of Mahar of someone who had found a bunch of stuff uploaded to Chegg, potentially had, and was not had some issues and was not centrally reporting them, and it's, I think, part of it is laziness. Part of it is toward, in these papers that happen toward the end of the semester, it's not even lazy. It's really kind of being overwhelmed. I suppose it's, I'm a little, when I read that too, I was like, I guess I was a little concerned that said, this is clearly not your writing and came from a paper mill assertion, but doesn't actually produce the source, where it came from. And like, I've had some really sketchy, where I'm pretty sure the student didn't write it. I just could not produce a source. And in the end, I had to let it go and try through assignment design to minimize the benefit of doing something like that. But I see Linda there has her hand up, so I'm going to shut up and let her talk.
Go ahead, Linda.
I think
sometimes it's like the shock and awe in a bad way of receiving something like that from a student. Because actually I had an incident with I think it was with the final paper that like I still have to go back and look at it and say what happened, because the student was on track for writing the kind of paper he needed to write for the class, and yet he's turned in a paper that had it's like I'm still not sure what I was seeing. He had large pieces of something from somebody else, but it wasn't even fitting the requirement for the assignment. So either way, it was just 0, right?
Right.
And so that was the kind of plagiarism. It's like, well, is he just not citing his sources, or is he really just, screw it, I'm just putting this in here, you know what I mean? And then again, well, both of them are plagiarism, right? But then we also don't, for somebody missing like the citation of one source, but they've got the citation at the end of their paper, we don't call that plagiarism, even though technically it is. So yeah, there's just like a whole lot of yeah, and I think that kind of puts some instructors in a conundrum in that way. One, not expecting to see it, and then 2, having to qualify, okay, well, is this or isn't it? And so when in the past I've been able to, I'll have a conversation with the student first, and then, I think this happened to me twice, and I have a conversation with the student about it and say, well, this is what this is. So, and then I know for sure in one of those incidents I reported it. I can't remember the other one. So but like even with the first one, I was like, I don't know what to do. So I went to the chair and asked, well, what do I do? So yeah, so it's an added thing to, you're just, trudging through your papers, and then you get that, it's like, what?
Yeah. And when it's the final paper of the semester, I especially get that you've got, time is squeezed down. In a case like yours, you've got a student who didn't have any, that there wasn't any trail leading up to that point to make you think, well, I'm going to look at this paper first because I'm worried about it. So I appreciate that is a tough one to deal with. And, not all cases are so clear that a report is necessarily the thing that you have to do. But I think you did what I would hope everyone would do, and have the conversation with the student. And, the conversation allows you to voice what you see and to put that in the context of things that you've seen in other classes, and allows the student the position where they can say, look, I really did screw up. I left it until the last second. What can I do to make this better? And if it is, if it's a student who's gone along ethically throughout the semester and just made a mistake at the end, I think you have a better position from which to say, okay, here's what I want you to do, rather than just, you need to drop this class, you're done for. So, yeah.
I mean, I also think, you mentioned, in the letter, derail your career. And that reminds me when Middle States came and there was a group of faculty and we were talking about the academic integrity policy, which was revamped right around the time. And someone else another faculty chimed in, that it's a good thing we were on Zoom, because I wanted to punch this person in the throat, right in front of the accreditors. But she was like, well, it'd be reluctant to report because they could get into big trouble. And I don't want them to get into big trouble. And, once again, I'm like, that's not really what happens in the policy. Like, one incident does not. And you come to this conclusion that you haven't discussed with anybody, or, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's work, and I can understand why people don't want to do it. It's a lot more work. But Magdalena has her hand up, so I'll shut up.
Yep. Magdalena, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if it could be the other reason, rather than being worried that it will derail the student's career, maybe some people just don't report anybody because they think that nothing's going to happen anyway. Now, I don't know if they're right, but I do have some experience with a student begging me not to report them because it was their third violation and they were going to be kicked out and they weren't. So I don't know what actually happens, but I'm just wondering if some people just think that, what's the point?
Yeah, that is something that I'm sure that people think. You know, Brandon is here, so he can certainly comment on how seriously we take nowadays when students are reported for a second time or for a third time, or if they're reported for a second time with something that's more significant than the first time or anything like that. And I can say that we have in place now the tools that allow us to more effectively identify when people multiply offend, and then I think that we have a policy in place that puts us in a better position to do something when those things happen.
Paul, I know this wouldn't be for everybody, but given the layout of what you shared with us in the case study, I wonder if there's a template that could be shared. I feel like I saw one a number of years ago of, you know, here's what I've witnessed, or, you know, whatever the case may be, here's the evidence, have you, and then, you know, here's what can happen. I feel like I've seen that in the past. You know, here are some of the things, whether it was written out about either the 0 or the E, or, you know, I wonder if there's a way we could provide that for faculty to use if they choose to, not to force them to, but you know, just to give them some guidance so that those emails.
Yeah, I think it can be subject specific, Grace, but I did a few workshops on Chegg, right, John? And I think there I kind of presented the letter or the email that I gave to students too. And it you know, Linda actually talked about understand the process too, and I don't know, maybe so it sounds like a good job for a flow chart. Right, to maybe a little infographic or something that's even easier to follow, right?
Or an AI tool.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
An AI tool. Yes, I actually, you know, it's just been playing with the chat GPT too. And I was like, you know, write an encouraging letter to a student that didn't do well on the first exam, and right, or write a caution to a student that, right. Magdalena said, did Chegg change their practices? Perhaps we could have an update. So Chegg's honor code report no longer reports the name or the IP address from the upload. All right. So it can be very difficult to identify people. It depends. You know, I have a really large question pool. And so I was able to successfully identify a student last semester just because the uniqueness of what they drew. Because they you know, as Chegg users do, they'll post all the questions at once to get, you know, because they only get so many a month. So they try and condense them and make the most of their $16. And right. And it was the exact draw, exactly matched his and no one else's. So, right. So it was not. And, you know, you talked about reporting, and I'm just telling you, this student was an online student. He was in one of the SUNY's, one of our online programs, and was struggling in my upper level economics class. And yet he had gotten A's in all of these other classes in other disciplines that actually had a lot of relationship, right? Where good performance in these specific classes would indicate that you should probably do really well and be very ready to take this course. And yet he was incredibly lost. He ended up dropping. But I thought it was interesting because I kept thinking, knowing the classes that he had taken, I kept thinking, I wonder if he's checked his way all up through junior year. And now he's stuck with someone who checks for it and can't do the work. And this is the consequence of us kind of not caring about it, by the way, is you get students will hit somewhere where they can't, either because the design of the assignment makes it very difficult, right? Or because someone is actually more set up or more aware of it and is monitoring for it as well.
Right.
I saw a huge increase this year of students not understanding or not putting the time in to do in-text citations. They had them at the end, which is great.
Right.
But it was almost like a rubber stamp on every draft of their final paper was you need in-text citations or it's plagiarism. Like, I think I wrote on every single one, and most of them made a conscious effort to make it better. So, and also I think the thing that I didn't see too much in that email was directing the student to resources to help. So whether it's the librarian or content librarian or the writing center or X, Y, and Z, maybe that could be also part of what Liz was talking about, like the content specific or discipline specific resources to prevent the plagiarism that students just might not even be aware of. Some are, but some aren't, I think.
And the other thing I'll note, I think, is we'll talk about ChatGPT and how it affects, assignments and how you're going to structure them and learning assessments. And you see this chat in Twitter too. And I would note a lot of the ways that you fight something like AI do not scale really well, right? And I don't know how John could even weigh into teaching a big section as well, that some of the things that I might use to thwart, a bot don't really scale really well. But in a class of 25 to 30 that I might teach in the fall, I've got a lot of structure and design that can sort of thwart or even use it. There are ways where you can actually tell them to generate something and critique it, or, and things like that, that are really good practice for them. So, but I do think, in issues, particularly people that do a lot of large scale or have a lot of students, if you've got 150 students, multiple sections for the semester, right? A lot of the ways that you're grading don't always scale. And if you're trying to use, frequent low stakes and using best practices like that, it becomes even more of a challenge of design as well. So I think it's just been, I guess it's not unique for anything, but it's been a big chance. But there's a lot of faculty shaming that goes on, right? Because people are like, I want students to do this. And like, well, I guess you don't care, right? I guess you didn't give them a loaf of your liver, so you're just not that committed of a teacher, right? So you get some of those kind of things, and but other people raising legitimate things, legitimate concerns. Ooh, John, using the bot.
That's a big chat message, John.
Yeah.
Well, it was generated by ChatGPT, so. Just as a sample letter.
Right. I mean, I'd be happy. I would share a sample letter. It can be very specific to my sample letters. Often lately have often center around Chegg. Particularly, either people used it, they searched for the question and used the answer, or more seriously, they kind of uploaded it. So, and again, that's, I've been going to these, and it's pretty important for a syllabus for any faculty to interpret the college policy in their syllabus. For what I grade you on, this is what's cheating, and this is what isn't, right? And so, you can't upload things to these sites. I don't expect you to use these sites. I've added AI text generator in my list of activities that aren't permissible. As well. So I've edited it too. And I think that specificity can be helpful in the process as well.
So John, what prompt did you use to generate that?
It was just write a letter to a student that you are accusing of plagiarism. It doesn't mention the college policy, so you'd have to modify that and, tell them what the next steps were. But it's pretty good at these things.
Yeah.
It is.
Much better than our students are at writing. I have to say.
And it's not, and this is a good example of how ChatGPT starts this. You have this here and now you edit it, right? So you can look at this and say, well, this isn't specific enough about next steps and all of that. But this is something, looking ahead to what ChatGPT can do for our students. It's like, I don't even know, students struggle to even start the paper, right? And they panic, right? So how would you use ChatGPT to write an introductory paragraph for something? And so how would you take that and now customize it, right? And that can be, when you're scaffolding or staging writing processes, I think that's something legit to do is, so what is your topic now? And so, what if you threw something at ChatGPT to describe or explain your topic in 5 sentences or, be very specific, what would it look like? Okay, so what's wrong with this intro? And how could you make it better? How do you customize it? Things like that.
Of course, there are other things that they can use to edit those papers, right?
Sure, there are.
like-
And I mean, and even in your field, right? There's, there's photo math and what is it? Wolfram Alpha? Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there's, there's a lot of tools, for, because honestly, if you stick an equation in Chat GPT, I don't know how well they do with that yet. I'm
It
sure
doesn't do well with math.
But there have been other tools I'm sure you're already aware of that do those things as well.
which is, I think, why in the math department, we don't give a lot of credit for homework. Some, but not a lot.
Mhm. No, I mean, I think if I were faced with you where someone could really input equations to solve or things like that, you're right. I would be flipping a lot more and doing a lot of in-class work, right? Where you could track it or things like that, or give someone a solution and then make them critique what's wrong with it.
I was just gonna add that, in teacher ed, we can use, we can get around this a little bit by always having them use experiences from their field work to augment what maybe it was generated by AI or to, in a way, it's no different than what they might expand on from the textbook that we use in the class. And so I think something that Paul said earlier about the importance of really thinking about the prompts that we give students can really sort of flip a little bit about how we might use AI, whether it's a tool students can use or whether it's a tool to do better or a tool to not do real thinking or do real work. So I think it has to be, I think we have to be thoughtful. I mean, some of it is our responsibility as instructors to know what's out there and be able to evaluate our students on what we want to evaluate them on.
Having them do reflections, authentic assignments that
Right.
cannot be replicated, that tied to their learning and their
Right.
experiences.
Right. No, I think Carol's point is really good because I think that's those what you see out there is one of the number one recommendations to try and sort of thwart or minimize the use of Chat GPT as a substitute, right? It's a complement for your learning and the things you're doing in course instead of the substitute. And like you said, they said if you make them reference to things you do in class. And actually real currency. I think
It
right now,
stopped in 2021. So
right,
anything
Chat
after
GPT
2021
stops
is
in
not-
2021.
But
So,
it will make stuff up. But so
Yeah.
do our students. So.
Yeah, it totally makes up sources and everything. It's quotes, things like that. So, but that was a number one. And number one too is like visuals, the use, so if you make them generate a graph and write about it, Chat GPT is going to have some limited abilities to really answer that, right? It could probably do pieces of it, definitions or things, but it's not going to be able to really do a visual.
I had also heard that having students reference previous work in that new work, so like, my first reflection, I said this, and this, and now
Right.
I think about it. Or
Right.
I've, gotten deeper knowledge or whatever. So that might not necessarily be around field work like we do in the School of Ed, but it certainly could be around other courses that students
Right.
have.
Or someone else's, if you did peer editing, referencing someone else's, or, John's a big one for using the annotation tools. I think it's a lot hard. Chat GPT is going to be a lot less helpful, if you give them the reading and ask for annotation.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's nothing, I don't know, I lived through, at first I saw it and it kind of freaked me out. I'm like, well, this is how Skynet ruins my retirement. But this is, but it, I think people felt this way about Wikipedia. The internet itself is like, well, why do we have to teach anything? Because people just look it up. And that's not really how learning scaffolds, right? And how knowledge acquisition works. And, MOOCs were going to end higher education. That did not happen. I do.
Scaffolded assignments in general are a way around this.
Yes.
I do think though that the suggestion of having a flow chart around the academic integrity policy would be really helpful. I know like I have, we've all read it or have scanned it, but it would be nice to have it presented in another context maybe, or in another format. So then it seems like it's fresh and just remind everybody about it. I think that that's a good idea.
That sounds
Yeah, I
like
do
a
too. I
great,
imagine you'll probably do some revisions around AI text bots or things like that. You might be adding, so I guess that would be a good opportunity to roll something out.
this sounds
And
like,
Yeah.
ChatGPT will generate some good ones, good
Yes, they
examples.
will. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to generate a summary of this report.
it sounds like a really great project for incoming associate dean.
Wait a minute. I'm not sure how that got flipped, but we can talk later.
To have something that's like really easy to look at, that like
Yeah.
just gives the brief steps to it.
Yeah,
I think that would help professors feel less intimidated when they're confronted with a situation, of a student plagiarizing. So,
Right.
I think that would help a lot, because all you have to do is look at the pretty thing on your, wall, and
just like the
Filter.
student, right?
pretty
the student-
colors draw me in, I like pretty
Right.
colors. But then I just have to look at that. What do I have to do? Oh, okay. So like, and then, do what I gotta do. But
Like
especially
the
that I
student in
am
distress
barely
flow chart, right?
forgetful.
There's that flow chart that comes out for students in distress or student concerns, right?
Yeah,
So we really want to model it after that. A one
Right.
page, right? Doesn't have to get into details, but it can, how you would progressive, and you can have little boxes going off and saying, talk to a senior faculty in your department, talk to your chair or something like,
Yeah, because the design of it promotes action, promotes you taking in the information of what you need to do and acting on it. So that's kind of what it seems like Paul really wants to see happen, and what we need to see happen is for the reporting to happen when it needs to happen, because it means something.
I also just think the whole reporting, the Maxient students don't get a copy of their Maxient report, correct?
Correct.
I think maybe they should. I think maybe once it's submitted, it should be sent to them.
It can be changed. That is something that
I
we
don't
could,
know.
yeah.
I think, it's all, and potentially you send the reporting faculty member sort of a copy of it. And then I don't know how security issues come in there, because our Gmail server email is not as secure as probably what Maxient is running, maybe not. And so those become issues, although, people talk about grades and stuff and FERPA compliant issues on our email all the time. So I guess I don't know if that's different, but potentially the student, the advisor, and the reporting faculty should all get a copy of the report that was submitted. It should generate to them. I don't know if we have to change policy to do that, but you send it and it goes out there, and like, you don't even have a copy of exactly what you sent if you don't, think to do that. And you tell students you're going to report them, and they may never hear anything. So they don't really know if that report ever happened, if you were just threatened and didn't do it, or, so that's, and they might find out later those reports have been sitting there.
And I think that there are a lot of those that happen, that the instructor says, well, I'm going to have to, report you for this. And because people get busy, because of whatever, they end up not.
And there's certainly enough information entered where you have their date of birth, their height, the weight, their address, the date they were admitted, and all the other things you have to look up to submit the report.
All you need is a name and a student number.
I think the form asks for a lot more though, doesn't it?
It asks for some other things, but I'm not sure how
Like
much of
their
that.
address.
Yeah,
and-
all that's really required is the name and the student ID. It doesn't, those are just boxes that are in there from Maxient, but you don't need to fill all those in for the report.
It might be nice to suppress that though, just to lower the cost of faculty.
I don't know if it's possible to suppress it because it's a thing, but I can check on that, because if that's something that's stopping faculty from submitting reports, which it might.
I think the
Being
faculty
asked,
that don't
but-
submit never
yeah.
get to the form. I think faculty that don't want to never ever open that
I
form.
mean, I definitely get forms from, the same people, right, are using the form all the time. So unfortunately, but fortunately, they're still using it. But I think I can restrict that to just needing the name and ID. So if that would help.
That would be great.
We also had a situation where about half, it was during the online, it was during pandemic, but I think half the class, so two sections actually, so maybe 30 people cheated, used photomath or something like that. And that's a lot of forms to fill out if that happens.
So
Yeah,
the
but
form,
you can use the same form, like if you
yeah,
have a
the form
class of
allows
10
up to
people.
99 students.
Right. It's
Oh,
one
okay.
form with a whole group, and you can just list the whole group for the same, if it's the same test and the same action, photomath, check or whatever, you can just use one form, Magdalena, you don't have to use.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe you should let Rayhan know that task that you assigned when you broke up the task for the associate deans. Just a thought.
I have a response to that, but I'll hold on to that one. Because whatever task you're assigning me, you might be assigning to somebody else. So no, I guess, I mean, I'm stepping down as associate dean, so Paul knows this. So
Oh, okay.
so whatever you assign me, you're going to assign to my successor.
Unless they can't come up with a successor.
Oh, so we don't have a replacement in mind.
I was flexible in my resignation, but I have put a end date on it too. So
Okay.
It's long off though, far off.
I'm sorry I'm late. I had a admin meeting that ran over, so I ran out of there until I barely couldn't stand it. So then I just said I'm going to my other meeting.
Well, as always, we've solved all of the world's problems here. So
We have.
anything else? Any other questions or concerns?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for hosting us, John.
Thank
Thanks.
you.